Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Here's that figure then, 10 to 8. Of the 28,526 migrants who crossed the Channel in small boats last year, I asked you what percentage were solo males, single males? Was it 70, 80 or 90? It's 90% of them were young solo. So does that in some way influence your understandable initial reaction? What the hell are we doing to, right, there is a problem. Is this the way to address it? Let's get more background on this now from Conservative MP and Welsh Secretary of State for Wales, I should say, who for some bizarre reason has decided to swap the delights of Carmarthen West and some South Pembrokeshire today for the hot seat in Westminster. Either that or he didn't hand in very good homework. I'm not sure which it is. Thank you for coming on, Secretary of State. This is being decried as inhumane and not the true face of Britain today. Are you ready to defend it? Morning, Simon.
Yeah, good morning. I really hope that is inaccurate. What we are determined to do is to sort of break the business model that criminal gangs have relied on for so long and the agony that they cause. What we're also determined to do is to work with the Refugee Council, the Red Cross and other charities in this sector, because the top of the list of priorities here is finding humane solutions for people who've been subjected to the most awful traumas and exploitation and dangers, and in some cases haven't survived those dangers. So this is a problem which we've been looking at on the telly for years now. We've been criticised for not gripping it. We are now gripping it, but we need to work, as I say, alongside numerous other partners to make sure that we get to the right outcome.
Secretary of State, I understand that these people traffickers earn vast sums of money. Why do you imagine it will break the business model? Because they won't care whether these poor individuals get to Romford or Rwanda, will they?
Well, I think I think they will. That's the whole point. And Priti Patel and the PM are going to spell out the detail of this later on today. But if they think that the potential lucrative returns that they've been relying on so far are going to be in jeopardy, because we have the Ministry of Defence helping out in the Channel, and we have an arrangement with the Rwandan government for the proper and humane treatment of these people, then the criminal gangs will realise that their potential source of income will dry up. That's the plan. But I say it's the devil is in the detail, as it always is. But we simply can't just sit back and continue to watch 28,000 people, using your number, attempting to cross the Channel. Some people, I was told yesterday, have been trying to cross in sort of blow up paddling pools and things like that. We read about the deaths before, dreadful deaths before Christmas, and that doesn't even before we even start talking about the cost. People are astonished. We're paying the thick end of £5 million a day in hotel fees at the moment. And it makes much more sense to sort of spend our money more wisely to make sure that there is a humane outcome for whether they're an asylum seeker, an economic migrant or a refugee.
And just, maybe you'll say, Secretary of State, well, I don't have the detail yet, Nick, but just walk us through it. Someone makes crossing through in this fashion from, let's just say, the example of Vietnam. He's picked up in Dover or Folkestone. He then goes to Rwanda, where his application is processed and he's unsuccessful. What then happens to that young man from Vietnam?
You were right. I am going to say that's a detail that I can't go. I'm really sorry. I wish I could, but I think that the Home Sec and the PM are very adamant that's the detail we need to spell out later, because that's part of the memorandum of agreement with the Rwandan government. And as I say, I think that's something which the Home Sec...
Final point on this, if I can, Secretary of State. I mean, you will be the first, I'm sure, to salute the incredible generosity of around 200,000 families living in this country, many of whom I'm sure are living in Wales, who've opened their hearts and their homes to people from Ukraine. I would argue that shows the true face of Great Britain and British tolerance and welcome. And then we see this approach to people arriving from Vietnam and other countries who, some would argue, have got darker skins. Secretary of State.
I mean, I think the reputation that we have and we're trying to build for as being a nation of sanctuary, whether that be Wales or the rest of the UK, is actually second to none. I think sometimes we don't champion our successes enough, whether it's Ukrainians, whether it's people from Afghanistan, Syria, Hong Kong. We have a fantastic record as being that nation of sanctuary. And actually what we're proposing with the government of Rwanda is to improve the chances. It's to to break up the criminal gangs, to reduce the horrible level of exploitation, and to improve the chances for people who've crossed half the world at huge emotional and personal and financial expense. At the moment, they are being put in dreadful danger by these ruthless people. And so I think what we're doing is really consistent with our reputation. As I say, we pride ourselves on this Nation of Sanctuary label. And I hope that this, when it's up and running, will be able to reinforce that reputation.
Couple of last points while I have you on the line, Secretary of State. You're obviously a loyal bloke. You are standing by the Prime Minister. But as it is reported that he could have attended 6 of the 12 gatherings or events that are under investigation, how many parties would be too many parties for you, Simon Hart?
Well, I think your point about loyalty, I've always thought loyalty is really easy when things are going well. I think that the test of loyalty is how you behave when things aren't going quite as well.
I follow the England rugby team. I'm with you on that, so do go on.
That's where we sort of find ourselves. The answer, for my answer to this, and it will appeal to some, it won't appeal to others, is contained in the story I was looking at earlier on, which Steve Swinford wrote in the Times back in June 2020, which was all about that event in Downing Street, where he and Rishi Sunak had a bit of birthday cake and they sang happy birthday, the stuff for which they have both been fined in the last few days. And what I find odd about that is back in June when it was written is absolutely nobody picked up on it. The Times newsroom, Steve Swinford himself, the experienced journalist, the police, commentators, opposition members of Parliament, nobody thought that it was remotely unusual or unlawful that should have happened in Downing. Indeed, Downing Street gave the story to the Times. And I think that, for me, sort of contextualises what we're looking at here, which is, obviously the people involved proved to be wrong in retrospect, but at the time there was no belief that was an offence which was likely to result in a fixed penalty notice.
But we do now know that the law was broken, of course.
We do now know, and the PM's held his hands up and said, look, but I can imagine, and I suspect this isn't the end of it, and I can imagine there will be other occasions which the police are looking at which may end up in the same place, I don't know. But I don't think it alters the fundamental basis upon which I base my decision on, which is that although those were misjudgments at the time, they were not in any sense with sort of malice aforethought. Otherwise, they wouldn't have briefed them to the press.
But that brings me back neatly to my first point. How many parties? Come along, Mr. Hart. How many parties are too many parties? If he's a repeat offender, as it were, 6, that's going to get mighty difficult, isn't it? The strain's going to tell with his support.
Well, I will have to see. I mean, different MPs and others will come to different conclusions. But I think there are also quite a lot of people who are looking at this as one problem, if you like, because it was all these things allegedly happened around the same time. They were entered into, as it turns out, in a sort of misjudged way. But at the time, and as reported, they were not considered to be offences. So I don't know. For me, it doesn't make a lot of difference whether it's 1 or 3. Others will take a different view. But as I say, I think the correct sanction is a fixed penalty notice. I don't think fixed penalty notices should include automatic sacking for people who happen to be in public life. That just happens to be my rather liberal view.
Even if we got to half a dozen?
Frankly, the principles are the same whether it's 1 or 5. Some people will take a view that there's a sort of ceiling. I personally don't understand the logic of that. But others, as I say, others may take a different view.
And lastly, if he didn't think he was doing anything wrong, I wonder why the PM chose not to protest against the FPN, the fixed penalty notice, and to proclaim his innocence.
Well, I mean, I think the Times story I was referring to, I mean, in a sense, clearly demonstrates that not only he, but quite a lot of other people didn't think anything was wrong. And indeed, anybody who read the Times story at the time clearly didn't. If any police officers read it, nobody thought that it was untoward and therefore warranted a fixed penalty notice. But you know, and I know that in these situations, the PM has held his hand up. He has shown contrition, he's apologised, he's attempted to rectify, and I hope rectified, the sort of structural issues in number 10. And, he has accepted responsibility. We could argue about it and he could appeal it, but I think he's quite right to say, no, this was on my watch. It's therefore my responsibility. I will take the rap for this. And that's what he's done.
Safe journey back to the delights of Wales. Thank you for your time today. Secretary of State for Wales, Simon Hart, appearing here on LBC, where at 8 o'clock the news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, some asylum seekers could be flown more than 4,000 miles away to Rwanda while their claim is processed. The government is due to